Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And as I'm sitting here recording this, it's the time of year where you sit around, you be thankful for things, you reflect on the blessings in your life. And that is not hard for me. I have so many beautiful things to be thankful for. My heart is so full. I have family and friends, and we get to do this life-giving thing together. I don't know if you appreciate that fully the same way that I do, but for me, this has been unbelievably meaningful in terms of my faith, my growth, the fact that you don't expect me to know all the things or have this perfect, flawless presentation where I just come with all the knowledge about the stuff, that we can do this and be in process together. It's just awesome. I have so much to be thankful for. But one thing that I think I maybe haven't had front of mind enough lately is how grateful I am and how much more grateful I ought to be for the 4 people in my life who I call grandparents. I won the lottery on the grandparent front. They've all passed on now, but they were all in my life all the way through my formative years. I knew them and knew them well. I knew them when they were young and active and doing stuff, and we got memories and adventures and travels and bumps and bruises and all of that stuff together. And I miss them dearly. And I keep doing this thing where I look back on my time with them and I realize they were made of sterner stuff. They were of a certain metal, being from that generation, that I increasingly appreciate more and more, but I still don't think I fully understand the depths of everything that they were made of, and the restraint and the meekness and the long view that they demonstrated in how they invested in us. And, they would all rib me and I would rib them back. That's part of the fun. That's part of how we do things as a family. And one of the things that I used to rib my grandparents about a lot was telling me the same story again and again and again. And already, if you've listened to this podcast for a long time, you're like, dude, I hate to break it to you, but that must be a family thing, because you tell us the same stories over and over again sometimes. Yeah, it's true. It's totally true. But there's something new to be wrung out of a story each time that you tell the story. And I'm getting that better and better about my grandparents. And I'm also coming to understand that my grandparents were not somehow unself-aware. They knew what was going on. And when they told a story again and again and again, there was a reason. There was something that I was supposed to get from that story. There was some way in which that story was to be etched into the generational memory of our family, because there's a hard-earned, very expensive lesson or truth in that story that they didn't want us to have to pay for a second time when they already paid for it. Why would you do that? If you just listen to the story, that check's already been written, and it can be a gift that is simply handed down from one generation to the next. I see it now. I see it way, way better than I used to. And every day that goes by, I appreciate my grandparents that much more. Sometimes the Bible acts like my grandparents. It repeats a story that we feel like we've already heard and we already more or less get. And maybe as we're reading in real time, we feel this impulse to get on to the next thing. Let's go. Give me more drama. Give me more juicy stuff. But then here we are going over well-covered ground again. There are a lot of examples of this. I jotted down a couple before I turned on the microphone here. There are probably way more. You can tell me what you think of. But obviously, the Gospels would be an example of this, where you get done reading Matthew. If you're just going straight through the Bible, you get to the end and you're like, all right, what happened next? Oh, well, we're back to the beginning of Jesus. And then you get done with Mark, and then Luke does the same thing, and then John does the same thing, and then finally you move forward in Acts. Why would they tell that story 4 times? Well, I think there are a lot of reasons. I'm doing the thing in my brain where I have 2 pathways in front of me. I'm like, which way, Western man? How am I going to handle this thing? We could go all the way into why there are 4 Gospels, but there are 4 different theological points of emphasis for 4 different audiences. The idea, the fact that there are 4 Gospels and the story gets told 4 times is a way of communicating the truth that this was always meant for everybody. And there are a ton of angles. It's a super multifaceted thing that is God taking on flesh and going to the cross and defeating death and all of that. And covering that story 4 times is no waste of time when you go and look at it for yourself. So you got the Gospels. There's a repetition of the story there. You got Paul's conversion story. I processed through the book of Acts real hard a few years back. Really wanted to dive into that and try to understand it better. And as I was working through that, I remember thinking, dang, this Paul conversion story, it keeps coming up. We get it once from the narrator. And then on top of that, we get Paul recounting this story again and again to different people in different environments. And at first, it's like, you already told us that one, Grandpa. What are you doing? But then you think about it a little more. And you're like, dang, this is pretty central to the whole trajectory of where the whole message of the kingdom goes next. And to just cover it once feels like it kind of wouldn't be enough. Another example, this one from the Old Testament. How about 1st and 2nd Chronicles? Have you read those lately? It is mind-bending how much of the whole Old Testament is just in those 2 books. It overlaps a lot with 1st and 2nd Kings, but it covers stuff even before that. Why? Well, I think those stories get a repetition because coming out of the age we're looking at of Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther in the Persian exile, there's this attempt to go back and take stock of all the stuff that happened before and add up what went right and what went wrong. And if indeed 1st and 2nd Chronicles were composed by Ezra of Ezra and Nehemiah fame, then we get an even better sense of why the redundancy is there because of Ezra's quest to try to realign the Jewish people as they are opening up this second temple and rebuilding Jerusalem. He's trying to realign them to the ancient truths of God and to realign them to the law and to exhort them to get right what they got wrong in the past. So a big retelling, a big summary of all of the story of everything would be very helpful. There's a reason for doubling up the story. And I got some other examples that come to mind as well of repetition of stories in the Bible that I think are very intentional and all have a good motive behind them. But I also think you get the gist. So why are we talking about this? One, because I like my grandparents, and it's a time of year where you think about things that you're grateful for, and you express that gratitude, and you and I hang out, and I wanted to express my gratitude to my grandparents in front of you. So thank you for hearing me on that. Reason number 2 is because we're getting to another one of those Bible repetitions here in Esther chapter 9. The next passage you and I are going to look at from verse 24, really for quite a while, it's just a summary of the book of the Bible you and I just got done working through. And so it would be very easy to get to that and go onto cruise control and for you and I to be like, okay, Grandpa, I get it. Yeah, you just told us that story. Thank you. But I think that's the wrong way to come at it. It took me a long time to figure out that if my grandpa, my grandma was telling me a story they'd already told me a bunch of times, it wasn't because they were forgetful. It's because I still wasn't hearing the part of the story that I really needed to hear, that I really needed to internalize, and they could sense that because they knew the rhythms with which an outsider, a person, a kid would listen and how attentive I would be here or there. And so they just hit it again. So with that little life lesson that I've learned or am learning in mind, we're going to give the benefit of the doubt to the author of the book of Esther and try to understand and why this would be reemphasized and what they're really wanting us to catch and take with us from this story. I got one more thing that I want to tell you before we wrap up, and it's a really big thing. Jeff Foote, who does all the music for this podcast and who also edits this podcast. Did you know that Jeff, all the music here is original. Jeff does all of it, even the goofy stuff that we do from time to time in the outros, the little bonus episode song when we have an extra 6th episode of the week that happens on a Saturday. All of that is Jeff. And all the music we've done are little tidbits from previous albums that he's put out. He did an album called The Clamor and the Crash that was entirely inspired by that one season run of the Ironwood Rhino podcast that I did. And I love that album. And the intro music that you hear this season is all from that album. Well, he's got a new album that is coming out today. It's called The Coward EP. Jeff performs and records under the band name Rooktown, but Rooktown is Jeff. Jeff is Rooktown. I've heard the new album. It's great. I've already asked him if we could use excerpts from it for the music on the front end of the next season of this podcast, the Nehemiah season that's coming up. And so you're going to hear some of it there. But I would be so personally grateful if you would go and support my dear friend Jeff, who is so talented, by checking out the album. You can listen to it on Spotify, or if you want to go above and beyond and encourage an artist to keep making art, you can go to rooktown.net and just buy a physical copy of the CD in the same way that our ancestors used to do. And then you have it. It's something tangible, and it's something that tells him, hey, this is good, and we appreciate what you do, and we want you to keep making art. Again, it's rooktown.net, or I think you can also get it at rooktown.bandcamp.com. Whatever the case, there's going to be a bunch of links and stuff down below that you will be able to find it through. But let's go support Jeff. He's somebody who invests in you and invests in me, and I think it'd be awesome if we had his back today as this new album, The Coward, drops from his band, Rooktown. Thanks for hearing me out on that. Thanks in advance for supporting our friend Jeff. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.